Hello, can you hear me? Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our first Rethinking Church Strategies book discussion. And we are so very excited. And I'm going to have to figure out how to turn that little chime thing off. But we are so excited to have Dr. Obery Hendricks with us this evening to discuss his book, Christians Against Christianity. And if you all have not read the book, I definitely advise you to go ahead and get it. I actually listened to it on audiobook, so it kind of felt like he was talking to me, even though it wasn't him. So, but it definitely causes you to think more deeply about some of the racial issues that we are dealing with in our country. So let me turn off this little chime thing. So if you guys have questions, would love for you to post them in the chat because we will be fielding them. Gotcha. Thank you so much, Tasha. I just got some directions. So let me tell you a little bit about who Dr. Hendricks is, because outside of just like this incredible work, he is a scholar for real. Not one of those like people who call themselves scholars or other people say that they're a scholar, but he has a bachelor's in political science from Rutgers and MDiv with honors from Princeton Theological Seminary and a Master of Arts in Religion and a PhD in Religion from Princeton University. So that means he has read a lot and he has written a lot. But the book that we're here to talk about this evening is Christians Against Christianity. And in the context of what we are experiencing in our country, I thought that this was a very appropriate conversation for us to have. So we are going to turn it over to Dr. Hendricks to tell you all anything else about himself that he would like to let you know, and then also to start the book discussion. And then we'll come back with some questions for Dr. Hendricks. So Dr. Hendricks, the stage is yours.
Well, thank you. I turned it off by mistake. No, I'm not hiding from the folk. It was a mistake. Even though I have been getting some hate behind this book, and I should, because it's a book on fire. I wrote a book to rain fire down on right-wing evangelicals because I was, like so many folks, I was just outraged and chagrined and saddened, but outraged by what I've seen these right-wing evangelicals doing in the name of Christ, but doing what they're doing to this country, the way that they're dividing people, the lies that they're purveying, and their unwavering, unquestioning support for a very sick, pathological liar, a sociopathic, anti-democratic traitor to this country, Donald Trump. How they have lifted him up. Some have actually literally called him a messiah, literally. The late billionaire Sheldon Adelson, the Las Vegas casino magnate, his wife, as she said publicly, that she's hoping that there will be a book of Trump in the Bible. And so we're talking about a very, very I don't, well, I use the word sick, but I'll use it again. A very sick, hateful movement. And I'm not mincing any words because we've been mincing words too much, these folks. So Christians against Christianity, in it, I really looked to lay bare and expose the lies and the faulty theological underpinnings of right-wing evangelicalism, and also their convoluted misreadings of the Bible, unconscionably bad and wrong readings of the Bible. They have to be known so people can stop following them. So I began the book by talking about my childhood in Calvary Baptist Church in East Orange, New Jersey, and the kind of and what I also received from the little time I lived in Prince Edward County, Virginia, Farmville, Virginia, where I was born, and the beauty and the magnificence and the dignity of Black people in the Black church, how our ancestors were so loving and supportive and so community oriented, and looking out for one another. When they had benevolence offerings, it was really for benevolence, to help the least of these. And I talked about that because I wanted to give a counterpoint to the white Christian nationalist Christianity we see today. And then in the book, I took pains to deal with different issues to show how wrong they are and how they've misled people on various issues. And so, for instance, some folk might have noticed that John MacArthur wrote a letter against social justice. He said it's unchristian. And I took pains to unpack and to show folk that social justice, and I did it through biblical exegesis and through correct interpretation and translation of terms, to show that egalitarian social justice is the foundational ethic of the Bible, the foundational value of the Bible, which is so little taught, because so many people act like social justice is just something that political activists in the street do. No, it's what we all should be concerned about. Be concerned that the whole community is whole and healthy. I take pains to look at the whole notion of whether abortion is a sin. I don't take sides, but we have to be careful about telling people that they're sinning if the Bible doesn't say that they are. And that's important. I'm not saying whether anyone should get an abortion or not. I do know that there's room for mercy in life, and I do know that if our society really cared about the already born, like they care for the unborn, then so many women wouldn't even have to worry about whether they could bear a child and raise a child and support a child. I talk about the terrible xenophobia and anti-immigration stuff, and how the Bible that's the opposite of what the Bible says. In fact, the Bible even says one of the reasons that tithing was instituted was to help support immigrants. Many people don't know that. It's important to look at what the Bible says about homosexuality. Does it say that homosexuality is a sin, or is it what it says when you look at it correctly translated and in historical context? Is it too ambiguous for us to denounce 10-15% of humanity and saying that who they are is an abomination in the sight of the Lord? These are so important. So and then there are other things I talk about in the book, but I end with the final chapter, and the title is, I wrote this book, and you would think that I would remember all this stuff. I remember titles. I don't even remember my chapter titles. I remember what they're about. It's called The Spirit of Antichrist. And we need to look at what it means to be an antichrist movement. First John says it speaks of an antichrist and antichrists plural. And so we're not talking about some big metaphysical supernatural beast like in the book of Revelation. Anything that militates against the teachings of the gospel in the name of Christ is anti-Christian. It's antichrist. And so that's essentially what the book is about. I worked hard to rain down as much fire as I can on these people, because it needs to be done. Any movement that claims the name of Christ and they call a sick, lying piece of trash like Donald Trump a Messiah, and has millions of folks believing that they're telling the truth, is an abomination. And by the way, what I didn't say is that right-wing evangelicalism is a white Christian, white supremacist, racist movement. I show that its very roots are racist, and it needed to be done. And I pray that I have struck a blow to wake some people up and to turn them to stand against this evil that these people are purveying in the name of Christ, and it affects all our lives, what they're doing.
Well, thank you so much for that wonderful opening. I definitely have lots of questions for you. And I want to start with, this isn't your first book on this issue. You've also written The Politics of Jesus and The Universe Bends Towards Justice. What made you decide to write again, to come back and address this subject, placing Donald Trump in the center of your work?
Well, okay, he's not in the center. But you're right. I mean, you can't talk about right-wing evangelicalism and this wave of evil that they're purveying without talking about Donald Trump. So he is central to what they're doing. But I tried to spend as little time as I could on him while giving him the kind of whipping that he deserved at the same time, right? I was going to write a different book. I was going to write a book that was not a book of heat. I was asked by a publisher to just critique evangelicalism on certain issues, and but when I started looking at it, I couldn't give them a book like that. Not only that, if you've read my other books, I can only write when I have a lot of passion about something. If you read my other books, you know that I'm always throwing heat. I like James Brown said, I can't help it. And so that's why I wrote it, because I was so angry with what I was seeing. I just could not believe it. And we haven't seen enough people in the church stand up and say something different. And in the absence of a different narrative, so many people think that this right-wing evangelical movement is correct, including some Black folk. Really, I mean, more Black folk than we would like to think, which is really sort of unbelievable, but it's true.
And that is one of my questions. How do you address when Black Christians get co-opted into some of these movements, especially around the abortion issue and the immigration issue and the desire not to be unionized, when we are built out of community and all of our differences, and that's something that has kind of made us who we are. But then once we start to take on some of these, I would say Eurocentric thoughts, especially in the church, that has a very detrimental effect on our community, more so than the white community. So how do you address those people and just their thought process around this work?
You're talking about Black people?
Yes.
In particular?
Yes.
Yeah, well, one thing we have to do is return to the Bible, the biblical witness. And, our people, I think, are more, when I say our people, some African-American Christians, I think are more Bible-centered than mainstream Christianity in America. And so we have to go back and let the Bible interrogate them and say, wait a minute. Now, Jesus said that loving your neighbor as yourself is tantamount the same as loving God with all our heart, mind, soul, and strength. And so is what these people doing, does it have anything to do with loving your neighbor? Well, if it has nothing to do with loving your neighbor, then it is anti-Christian. Does it have anything to do with Matthew 25, 31, 46? Taking care of the least of these, and call our people back to the Bible. The other thing is to point out how racist this movement is in its very roots. Modern right-wing evangelicalism, which I date essentially from the 70s, did not start with opposition to the Roe versus Wade Supreme Court ruling that legalized abortion, though that's what these people say. It started when they got together to oppose desegregation. They got together to support white supremacy and to keep educational institutions segregated. And so it has racist roots, rotten roots, and we have to point that out to our people, that these folk don't have our interests in mind. Not only that, their Christianity is not like ours. Theirs is ideological Christianity. It's like, it has more to do with what suits their interests than what the gospel says. And, I think if we can make that plain to Black folks, a lot of Black folks, we're not stupid. A lot of Black folks will come that way. Now, there are some, Supreme Court justice type Negroes who would, who just like white folks ice because it's going to be colder no matter what, but most folks aren't that benighted.
I think that is so true. There's some people who talk about Sunday morning being the most segregated time in America, and it seems as though they pretend like they don't understand why. Can you speak a little bit to the history of that? And for the people who, think that we should all just come together and worship together, like why that is so difficult, especially today?
Yeah. Well, we have, Afro Christianity is just different from white nationalist Christianity. It's, think about it. Black Christianity, it has never been a part of Black Christianity to be in opposition to other people or to oppress other people. Mainstream white Christianity, that has been a part of who they are, right? Mainstream Christianity supported slavery for many years, and some of them still do. The Southern Baptist Convention was created, right, because they wanted to support slavery. And so we have different takes. Black folk are more they understand the love of Jesus better. I believe we talk about love. You don't hear these folks out here talking about love and justice. The most used trope in Black religion, and we see it in the spirituals, has always been the Exodus, right? The liberation event of our faith. That's not the same with whites. So the difference is, part of it is that whites have wanted to be segregated, but another part of it is that our people didn't want to be told where we couldn't go, but at the same time, we got a different way of seeing the world. It's almost like we have a different Christ. And so I think that has so much to do with it. Now, I'm talking in general terms, because there are a number of exceptions, but I'm speaking in general terms.
So we have a question from our audience. Reverend Horton wants to know, a lot of us have gone on to seminary to expand our knowledge and gain a view of the Bible that differs from what our church denomination advocates, but we return there to serve. Are we then complicit?
If we return to serve, what?
And I guess like once we've expanded our view, but then we go back into the denomination with the same indoctrination that we kind of left to go get away from, or to learn to learn more, but then we go back and do the same.
Do the same. Oh yes. And that's a conundrum, because so many of our congregations, particularly they're getting used to being audiences, right? Being entertained and being titillated, and it's like they have to have a certain level of emotional titillation. So I think that we have to decide. Let me use my own experience in seminary. I went to seminary, and I sort of went with a certain perspective, a more prophetic perspective, because I had grown up in the Black nationalist movement, so I was more political. But it developed more in seminary, through my own reading, and so I had to learn that I was not going to compromise what I had to say, but I had to learn to say it in the way that people could hear it, And so it always has to be rooted in the Bible. Always have to keep in mind exactly who we're talking to. I think it's best to keep in mind Aunt Sally in the pew, or Uncle Jimbo. And I'm not making up names. I have relatives, my family with the names, right? And make it plain for them. And if I might tell this very quickly, when I was in seminary, when I first was in seminary, after the first semester, oh man, I just knew more than anybody in the church, as far as I was concerned. I know none of y'all never went through that, but so I was invited to preach at a church at the 8 o'clock service, and I'm like, oh, this is a young people service. All right, well, I'm gonna hit them. I'm gonna show off. So I came in with a sermon, believe it or not, titled "The Political Economy of the Lord's Prayer." What the heck is that? That ain't no sermon, but oh yes, I get there, and I know the young people. I'm gonna get them all worked up. And what is it? It's the old folks service. I'm like, oh my Lord, this was gonna be hard enough with young folk. So I was inexperienced, so I didn't have another sermon. So I preached what I had. So afterward, the folks were so kind. You know how our people are. Reverend, that was a nice talk you gave. That was nice. But anyway, there was this elderly sister on a walker coming up the center aisle. And I saw her coming, and she was frowning. Oh man, she was frowning. And I was shook up. And I just knew she's gonna just wear me out. Finally, she got up to me and she said, Reverend, I said, yes, ma'am. I always know there was something wrong with what they was teaching us. And what I learned from that is, I wouldn't tell anyone to preach the political economy of the Lord's Prayer, but our people are open to more than we think they are. They see what's going on. They've gone through struggles that some of us have yet to go through. And so we have to trust them, but respect where they are, but trust that they are there because they really want to hear a life-saving gospel that is geared towards saving the community, because that's what Jesus talked about. He didn't, he didn't get all into, like Paul, looking at people's individual salvation. Whenever he talked about their individual salvation, it was in some way related to the welfare of the community. And in the Hebrew Bible, there's not even a word for individual. They just don't have a conception of it. So I hope that makes sense. I hope that addresses the question.
It most certainly does. And I think that especially for a lot of us younger preachers, it gives us the courage to stand up and to preach those hard sermons, because it can be tempting to preach the easy sermons that people want to hear. But, are those the transformative sermons that change people's lives? And I think that that's what we have to ask. And your work definitely is an encouragement. One of our listeners, Ms. Annie Scott, says she's interested in hearing what whipping you've received from the right, or even from some Black evangelicals who feel like you might be provoking them with this work.
Yeah, I haven't heard from any Negro evangelicals yet. I have heard from some whites, and what must be so frustrating for them is that they don't know enough. They don't know enough to discredit what I'm saying. You read the book, and I'll knock myself out till I have pages and pages of supporting documentation. They're mad about me talking about social justice is the foundational ethic of the Bible. Well, I can read Hebrew, and I know the history, and I can do that. So yeah, what I get is general hate. Oh, this book is terrible. I don't like it, and all that kind of stuff. But no one's come at me yet with anything of substance. But I do get hate. I do get some hate. Yeah, I do.
That's not surprising. And I think that I know that we will definitely be lifting you up in prayer as you stand boldly to do this work, because it can't be easy to have to deal with that hate when you're preaching love. Dr. Cassandra Gould on Facebook, hey sis, she says, what are some practical ways that we can begin to start to have some of these questions at the Black denominational level? We are all informed and conditioned by white supremacy, and it has infected and informed our theology. While we worship differently and our Christology is often different, we too are often complicit.
Yeah, well, she's right. White supremacy is looms so large over our lives, and it's so pervasive in so many ways, big and small, that it's hard not to be complicit in one way or another. If I have the question right, what we have to do is try to be conscious. And particularly when it comes to the gospel, to have some baseline things that, baseline touchstones. One is love your neighbor as yourself, and ask the question, does this, what this person is saying, or what this policy does, whatever, is it consistent with loving our neighbor as ourselves, being concerned with the common good, that kind of thing. Also, remember that Jesus Christ was he was a colonial subject. He was oppressed, and he was preaching to an oppressed people, and he was trying to raise their consciousness. That's why you see him always on the way in Mark. Mark says he's always on the way. And we keep that in mind, and we also keep the function of the biblical prophets in mind. It says we have a prophetic responsibility to speak truth to power and to stand against evil and oppression. That would help us quite a bit. But many of us do things and go back and say, wow, man, I wish I had known better. Well, we're under a demonic system. So what do? We have to say, well, thank you, Lord. I see it now. I'm not going to do it again. That's the best I can say at the moment. That's the best I can do,
Do you feel like your book was a foreshadowing of what happened January 6th? It feels like everything that you wrote predicted that January 6th would happen. Did you have that feeling when you saw the insurrectionists or the domestic terrorists at the White House, that you knew this was coming?
Yeah, well, when I wrote Christians Against Christianity, even before that, Yeah, I knew who Donald Trump was, and I begged folk, a lot of folk, I'm not voting for Hillary. I'm just not voting. I'm not going to vote for the lesser evil. I'm like, we're talking about the lesser danger. We're not talking about the lesser evil. And, living in the New York metropolitan area, and I'd worked on Wall Street in my first career. And so, I knew all about him. I knew he was dangerous. I knew that he didn't care about anyone or anything. Anyone who followed him knew that he's a sociopath. And so I did expect him to do something heinous when he lost the campaign. I was not surprised that he tried to overthrow the government. I was surprised the way that it happened. But I always knew, and I told everyone during the first election, that he's running to rule, not to serve. And so when you rule, you decide, you become the ruler for life. You decide if you're going to leave. And it was obvious that's the way he saw things. I mean, he tweeted about a Trump in the White House to 2060. People overlooked that kind of stuff. He saw himself as a king. He talked about my generals, like he's Alexander the Great or something. So yeah, I expected something. I was surprised it happened like it did on the 6th. But I knew something was going to happen like that, yes.
So
and the book was a warning, yes.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
So do you see any parallels between that mindset and what we're seeing in the church, where people do feel as though they have an ownership and that it's their church and that they're in charge and that they rule and that it's not around service? And what can that, I guess, foreshadow for us about the future of the church if we maintain that mindset?
Oh, sister's gonna get me in trouble, and I don't care either. No, part of it, if we look at the church as we understand it today, goes back more to Emperor Constantine in terms of the way the church is organized and its orientation. It was Constantine, as you know, who transformed the faith of the oppressed that Jesus taught into the religion of the oppressor who tortured Jesus to death. Since that time, the church has been, mainstream church has always been aligned with imperial powers or whoever was in charge. And churches have taken a model, an imperial model, because Paul talked about in the church there being roles like the fingers on the hand. That's not gradational. They all had an important function. Now, so that was a functional hierarchy, if you will, but now we have a gradational hierarchy, right? In which the ministerial profession often sees itself as a status rather than a role, and so churches become like fiefdoms, right? With the pastor ruling, and we have, and we ascribe a high level of spirituality, or a higher level of spirituality than everyone else to pastors, when that's not necessarily the case. They're supposed to be we can't, when I hear pastors, say that the Lord gave me a vision, to build this church, I'm like, all right, but he didn't give me that vision, all right? So, don't expect me just because you say that, like you got a pipeline. That's why I don't like to hear folk, the Lord told me. Oh man, come on. I don't want to get into that holy stuff. And there's a real problem, for instance, with this whole plethora of bishops, right? Bishops with 4 or 5 members. Some of them just, and they're not even supposed to be bishops biblically, in my opinion, many of them, but they treat it like it's a status. That's why so many want the title. It's not a status, it's a role. it's a role, an organizational role, right? And so, the church has to mature, and I see it happening. Some young people are starting to question. We have to mature to the point that we focus on the gospel again. And Jesus said he's the one among us to serve, not to be served. We need to start asking questions, and also to realize that if we are a member of a church, we have a right to ask questions. You can't ask a question now. You get up and you ask a question. Oh Lord, if a pastor says something that is offbeat and off base in worship, when you think about it, you should be able to say, Pastor, excuse me, Pastor, just a minute. Would you please explain that a little better? You better not do that, but you're supposed to be able to do that as part of a community. We're not an audience, a congregation of people. And so, until we start, until the and well, when that happens, then I think the church will become churches will become more relevant. They'll become more powerful parts of the community. Yeah, I'll leave it there.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I have one last question, and then I'm going to turn it over to Margaret Connolly for her questions. How do you believe growing up seeing white Jesus in our churches has affected our identity and who we believe we are as Christians?
Growing up and seeing Jesus,
seeing white Jesus, seeing Jesus as white Jesus,
yeah. Well, yeah, that's a problem, because for the same reason the King James Bible is a problem, because we can't see ourselves in the story. We don't see ourselves in the biblical story. We in a sense are second-class citizens. When you have biblical characters speaking like Elizabethan actors, and not the illiterate peasants that most people in the Bible were, it's hard to have a real concept of what the gospel was about and what the struggles were of those people, and that they were people just like us. And then when you have a white God and a white Jesus, it's bad enough that we ignore that Jesus said to follow him and instead act like he said worship him when he didn't. That's bad enough, because when you can't follow a God, you can only follow someone who's a man, at least while he's on earth, right? That's bad enough. But then if the Son of God is white, then God is white. And so we can't feel as empowered in the faith as we should when those who are over us, we see them as being someone different or something different. And so that's very deleterious. And we have to really stop this white Jesus stuff. But there are a lot of folk who, they love whites. White folks' ice is just colder. They just can't get over it. It's really sad. It's really sad. It's tragic.
Do you believe, and I said I had one last question, but this is really the last question. Do you believe that education reform could be the answer to some of these ills? Like, if we really educated people, not just white people, but Black people also, about the true history of this world, could that have an impact on some of the white nationalism that people feel, and even some of the Black inferiority, where people feel as though like we were not a great people and we did not have a path? Could education be a part
Joshua,
of
he's going to give you a helmet.
Hold on, Chris, let me mute you.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Now, what was that?
So I was asking if you believe that education could be one of the solutions to the problems that we're seeing. Like if we educate people about the true history of the world, not just Black people or white people, but if people really understood how the world was formed, because it seems like the whitewashed history is what feeds into white supremacy and white nationalism.
Yeah, there's a lot of educating to do with church history, for instance, so folk can see how much early Christianity, how much it had to do with people of color in Africa. We have stuff to do today. I mean, we live in a capitalist political economy, and capitalism, when you really look at it, it is also the antithesis of the gospel. You know, Billy Graham then said that capitalism is Christian. No, it's not. It's not Christian at all, because it doesn't care about the least of these at all. You know, corporations don't have any responsibility. So yes, I mean, we really have to teach, and it's more like, maybe look at it as raising consciousness, you know, so people can have a clear perspective on what's going on. Part of the problem is that so many, if not the bulk of our churches, do not do that. They don't educate people, and they should. Allen Baptist Temple out in Oakland. I remember the first time I preached there, maybe 20 years ago. J. Alfred Smith Sr. was the pastor. And when it came time for the announcements, sister stood up, and I expected to hear about fish fries and so is sick, blah, blah. Well, she started reading about current events, what people should be concerned about, and what they should think about voting about, how they should go to City Hall, do this and do the other. And when she got through, people had a sense of what was going on around them. Churches need to do more of that. And so what does that really mean? What means so many of our churches are not fulfilling their responsibility to the people. And they have to start doing that if our people are going to really be able to rise as we should.
Awesome. Well, that really was my last question. Now I'm going to introduce Margaret Conley. Tell us a little bit about yourself, and then you can dive into your questions for Dr. Hendricks.
I am Margaret Conley. I am a psychotherapist in the city of Atlanta. And so I've met Dr. Hendricks. And so that is what I do. I'm also I guess I'm sitting in my second unit of CPE that is coming to an end at the Atlanta VA. And so I'm doing that with Dr. Brenda Wallace. And so I have this duality in my life of where I look at Christianity and mental health or emotional wellness and how they work together. So that is what I do, and that is who I am. So I'm honored. I've had private conversations with Dr. Hendricks, but I'm honored to sit on this platform because I was taken away by the introduction that said a travesty period. I was like, who starts a book like that? And then literally defines that one sentence, and just beautifully written. I've read 2 books by you, and so it was you all day. This out of the now 3 books that I've read, this one is like my favorite. I did an Audible, then I had to sit down with the Audible and read. I was like, oh my God. So I just was amazed. I'm also a member of the LGBT community. And so chapter 4, I thought would be like my favorite, but it was not my favorite chapter, actually. It was a chapter dealing with xenophobia and migration, and how you just really beautifully wrote that it's like America skipped over the fact that we're caging up kids. We're separating families, we're splitting families. That hit me deeply. And then I have to say my next piece was, I never thought in life I would see someone actually come for the late Billy Graham, but you did it so wonderfully. And I was listening to the book again as I was writing, as my friend, I was in North Carolina recently and my friend was driving. I was listening to the book and reading on my Kindle, and I was like, oh God, we're driving on Billy Graham.
Oh my God.
So what my first question though actually is going to talk about that space of capitalism and Christianity. I grew up in rural South, but I grew up in a Black Southern Baptist church. And when I say that, like my childhood pastor really tried to push us to go Southern Baptist because he was going to get his 1.1 million bonus. That's what it was at that time. Really pushed. My grandmother and her friends were those not over my dead body people, and decided to say everything that white evangelicalism had done to them and their families. So that didn't happen. And he retired before it could. So we were grateful for that. So, but it was an economical move for the church. So a lot of Black churches are going into this space of capitalism and Bible, using a lot of Hebrew Bible that didn't make sense. One of the spaces they used, I didn't remember if it was in the book or not, but it was the scripture where David was asking people to bring for the temple. And so that's what Black people should do, is bring for the temple and the building. Money is the currency now. And so this is what we should do. But I'm like, there's a backdrop to why David had to do that. So I would like for you to, how can we get Black churches to see, because we moved away from the communal space of Black church to this elevation and buildings, literal buildings, and the pomp and circumstance of the title, which you said is almost like a badge. It's almost, bishop is no longer means I'm taking care, but it's where I'm striving for. How can we help Black church see that that's not biblical? It's not how that's supposed to.
Yeah. Well, the priestly aristocracy of the Jerusalem temple, right? I did, trying to think of which book I talked about this in. Not in this book, Christians Against Christianity. I think it was in Politics of Jesus. Talked about the priestly aristocracy and how
it was that
they were self-serving, and how they had the people thinking that the most important thing was to take care of the temple with their tithes and offerings, which incidentally also was how they were taken care of, right? And so recall how with the woman with the widow's mite, I think that's Mark 13, and how we were raised to say, oh, this woman, look at her faith. She gave everything that she had to the church. She didn't have anything even left to eat with. How wonderful. Well, that was not what it was. Jesus was mad when he told about it. He said, look how they fool these people into thinking that the church is even more important than them having something to eat, right? And so we have, I think one way to do it is to show that Jesus, one of the reasons that the priestly aristocracy turned him over to the Romans is because he was standing against this kind of mess, this kind of attitude, this what I called temple ideology, that the church is the most important thing. We've all heard that, and that's not true. And we also have to help people see that some of our religious leaders are acting just like the priestly aristocracy, like the temple priests. We also have to let them understand, like when Malachi said, will you rob God? Well, with the tithes, tithes were prescribed to support the temple and the priesthood. When the temple was destroyed and the priesthood dispersed, then that mandatory tithe no longer pertained. And it certainly doesn't pertain to churches. So I'm not saying that tithing is bad. I'm not saying that. I mean, tithing is a good way to get things done, but we have to stop telling people that first, the church is the most important thing, and that they rob God if they don't give money to the church. But not only that, we need to stop running our churches like capitalist enterprises. We have pastors now talking about their CEOs, right? I mean, God rest his soul, but I remember Eddie Long talking about he's a CEO. No, you ain't a CEO, man. You're a pastor of a church. We have to more than that, we have to help people understand alternative modes of political economy. There's more than one way to do it. Capitalism isn't the only way. We should be looking at what Martin Luther King talked about, democratic socialism. See something about that. So we have these things that we can do, and I think we have to do in order if we're going to become mature and to flourish. Because right now, our churches in general are not flourishing, except for a bunch of charlatans who are selling a bunch of mess to people. Well, not all flourishing churches are doing that, but many of them are, and we don't have to name names.
We don't. I almost wanted to, but no, we don't. So thank you, Dr. Hendricks. I don't know, that almost hit me. I almost wanted to come back and say, but how are they not CEOs? But because I have always been a part of, sadly to say, I've always been a part of something that seemed to be capitalistic church. You do actually see letters down that say CEO of whatever. So, but thank you for saying that, because it's almost like they lose the ability to pastor when it comes down to running the CEO company.
You can't run it like a business. You can't run a church like a business. You have to run it effectively and efficiently, but that doesn't. But to run something like a business, there's a certain ethos that you use, which has no place when you're involved with something that is community-based and community-focused, looking to lift folk up. But if what you're concerned is with a lot of fundraising, so you can do what they call kingdom building, which is really not building the kingdom at all. It's building, expanding the portfolio of the church. That's not kingdom building. That's, I'm not saying anything's wrong with expanding the church, but when we expand church for the sake of the church, sake of expanding, that's a problem. I mean, there was I know of an AME pastor in New Brunswick, New Jersey. His church, Mount Zion AME Church, when it got to a certain capacity, he would and it got to be like too big in that particular edifice, which was sizable. He'd send folk out to start another church, right? He wasn't looking to build the biggest church that he possibly could, so he could be a kingmaker. We have to get out of that quantitative mentality and start focusing on the quality of pastoral ministry and community service. It's not all quantitative, raising more money, getting more members, and bragging about how many members you have. When I ask him, Doc, how's your church going? Oh, Doc, we raised this much money and we got these many members. I said, yeah, but tell me about the quality of your ministry, man. Who are you helping? You see what I'm saying? We talk about the quantity and don't talk about the quality as much as the quality should be our focus.
I have two more questions. So I'm almost scared to ask this next question, but this question is intriguing because it's actually the title of chapter 2. And it's the secondary title. And
make sure you say the title of the book so that people know. Christians against Christianity. So
the title of chapter 2 is You Will Know Them by Their Fruit. Subtitle is The Strange Fruit of Right-Wing Evangelicalism. So when I saw Strange Fruit, of course, I thought about the song Strange Fruit, and I imagined and saw in my mind, like what are we finna read about something hanging and being? And then the way, the ebb and flow of this chapter was so beautiful, because I was like, well, Strange Fruit of Right-Wing Evangelicalism, where's this going? And how I hated to see it, but evangelicalism, put us back on these proverbial trees in regards to our education, in regards to spaces of proclamation. And so it bothered me when I read it, because I thought about some of our brothers and sisters who won't say that they're right-wing evangelicals, but they hold that space with the evangelical. And are they now the strange fruit?
Talking about
that subtitle. So I don't want to say names. I want to be good. But
you're talking about black. Talking about black.
But our black pastors that are sitting in those spaces now strange fruit. And I say that to say, like, by Southern Baptist Convention, how we had those Black pastors that literally dropped out after they would not add the critical race theory into education. And so, but I know some of those pastors, and they look like strange fruit. They look like the sacrifice, the murdered, the martyred, the whatever they needed to be in order for us to join in. They look like those that were hanging from trees, swaying because they wanted to be a part of this denomination. They took money, they took whatever, and then here they are now wanting to fit back into a community that looks like that democratic socialism. Those communities, those churches that are willing to accept everybody, move with everybody, but they want to still bring that same thought. So would that have been a part of the strange fruit of this right-wing evangelicalism that you were speaking to?
Well, yeah. I guess what I'm saying is that I mean, Jesus said, "You know them by their fruit," and all of those who are acting, and I point out in this chapter in Christians Against Christianity, that all those who are acting in certain ways that are anathema to the gospel, the fruit of their actions, all of them, black and white, is rotten fruit. And you know, we do have these Negro pastors, Southern Baptist pastors who, you know, it's interesting. They didn't have a problem with women not being ordained Southern Baptists, but you know, but then they had a problem with some others, and you know, they shouldn't have been there in the first place. You know, in my opinion, I mean, they shouldn't have been there in the first place, because this continues. And I don't care if they did have a black president. You know, this is the same denomination that the majority of them supported Donald Trump, right? Now, what business do you have pastoring folk in a denomination that is racist, that has racist underpinnings, and who supports a racist who would try to overthrow the country and to take your vote away? I mean, you know what I'm saying? Southern Baptist Convention didn't just become like that with Donald Trump. It's been there. And they shouldn't have been. So in terms of strange fruit, yeah, I don't know if I'm answering your question directly, but they're strange fruit. They're strange. I don't mean no harm, but they seem like strange Negroes to me. And, you know, I mean, some of them are very prominent. They'd be very upset to hear me say it. But, you know, I mean, I don't know how you can be bothered with people like with that or like that, because there's too many problems in the Southern Baptist Convention. Robert P. Jones wrote his book, White Too Long. He was in a white evangelical. And even he says, man, look, that's a mess. It's too white even for me. And, you know, it's too racist even for me. So now what are these brothers doing there? Sorry, gentlemen, I'm sorry, but I had to say it.
Yeah, you answered it perfectly. Perfectly. So, and I don't think they would sacrifice for Black people. I just think it was to get where they were going. And now to come back around. So that was the perfect answer for my question. I hope it answered, you know, the way I asked it for everybody else. So my last question, making sure I'm looking at time. Yes, my last question, and I highlighted what I wanted to ask, so that's why I'm looking at the book. My last question was actually about your reference to the Farwells, to the Father and the Son. This is not in the book, but you did reference them. And it was interesting that they came up in the book. But how do you think that we can help our Black community, and I mean Black community, not even people of color, but our Black community, see how that particular form of education is not saying that I don't know what they teach, because I've never went to that school or whatnot, but I can say they contradicted some of the things I've heard from people who've went. So how can we help our Black community see that there are other spaces to be educated, instead of sitting with leaders who, the father was very clear that social justice and social matters, he didn't believe they were of God. He thought they were separating the people, and we supposed to be
until he got
kingdom
involved.
building. Yeah.
Until he got involved. Well, you
Yeah,
know,
and then the son went against everything that his father put, and it came out. So how can we help our Black community see that?
You know, part of it is, you know, some years ago, I wrote the annotated commentary for the Oxford annotated Bible. I wrote it on the Gospel of John, and you know, I felt good about it. I was proud. I don't think any other Black scholar had done that particular Bible commentary up to that time, and so I told an aunt, because, you know, no matter how old you get, you know, you're still there, you know, they're young nephews and nieces. So I told my aunt, I said, you know, I want to show you this. She said, oh, that's nice. I like Jerry Falwell's Bible better. And I realized that the way they got a lot of these people to follow, you know, the Falwells and the Pat Robertsons and stuff like that is that they conflated moral conservatism with political conservatism, right? So folk thought they needed to be politically conservative in order to be consistent with the gospel. And so again, it's a consciousness raising function that we must get involved with to explain the difference to people, and again to show that I mean, they need to know that Liberty University was begun out of racism, right? They need to know that you know, that they wouldn't allow, when they allow blacks in, they wouldn't allow interracial dating, you know, and you know, like that. You know, folk need to know that, and they also need to know that there's a difference between our understanding of Jesus and Christianity and their understanding. And so many of them don't understand. So we have work to do, because Pat Roberts and those guys, they got the airwaves. And so, you know, so many people, and they have the publications and all that. So we have to do better in our churches to make sure that we raise people's consciousness so they know the difference. That's all we can do, I think.
So, and I said I had one more, but I know I have like 2 minutes. Also, you spoke to the use. You spoke to this space where they sit with abortion. Did it freeze? Am I unfrozen?
Something happened. It's frozen. Can you all hear me?
We can hear you, but you are frozen. That might be the face of the answer you might give to my question. In the book, you spoke to this space where they literally just took unborn and ran with it, and people jumped on that versus taking care of live people. Like, we are live, instead of focusing on racism and how we treat people of color and how we treat Black men and how we treat Black children, and how, you know, there is a difference in our educational systems. There's a difference in how Black women's bodies are treated than white women's bodies are treated during pregnancy and during birth. There is a difference in how we see that. There's a push for us to consider health and medical disparities, but they won't talk to us about that when we go to see our medical professionals. But yet we focus on abortion, and that became a lead topic, and it brought in a lot of African Americans, and that in the election with Trump. So how do we approach that? And I'm asking this from a psychotherapy perspective. How do we approach that with our Black evangelicals? I have several that come to my practice. I don't know why they choose me, but they come, and that has been an argument with several females. And I even talk about, you know, you have a right to your body and what has happened to your body and how that works, but they disagree. So how do we help our Black community, especially those that are evangelical, see how that was just a pull for a vote. It really wasn't a care and concern for community.
Yeah. Well, you know, in Christians Against Christianity, as you know, in that chapter, I tried to show, you know, the roots of that when, you know, Roe versus Wade legalized a voluntary abortion, elective abortion, that right-wing evangelicals supported it. You know, they supported Southern Baptist Convention, issued 3 proclamations, declarations supporting it. Falwell supported, Pat Robertson supported it. When did they stop supporting it? When they decided, they got together and decided that they were, what issues could they use to whip their followers up so they could try to dominate society and make the rest of us genuflect at the altar of their convoluted way of looking at the Bible, their convoluted Christianity. And they decided, and as you know, I document this in Christians Against Christianity from Randall Balmer, because Randall Balmer was at the meeting.
I think Dr. Hendricks is frozen, or is that just me? Okay, so we're gonna give him a second to come back. But are you guys enjoying this conversation so far? Like really deep, right? And Margaret, you're asking some great questions. I know
Can you hear me?
now we can. You were frozen for a minute.
Yeah, you all frozen. And man, I said some heavy stuff too, boy. Whoa, it was brilliant. But did you hear my explanation about why you didn't hear it? About wedge issues and all that?
We didn't get a chance to hear it. We can blame it on COVID. That's what I'm doing now.
Yeah. Let me say it. Let me see if I can get out real quick. It was so they had a meeting. Randall Baum was at the meeting, and he tells the whole story. They had a meeting where they were trying to decide what issues could they come up with to get people all whipped up, and so they could use the momentum to dominate American society and to get everybody to bow and genuflect at the altars of right-wing evangelical pseudo-theology. And they decided on 2 issues. One was homosexuality, they used as a wedge issue, and gay marriage, and abortion. Prior to that, those were not major issues at all. They're cynically politically calculated in order to whip people up, because the Bible doesn't even talk directly about abortion, not one place at all. And but it does talk about taking care of the least of these. Jesus talked about poor people more than anything else. It does talk about our responsibility for the most vulnerable, but you know, and that's those who are already born, walking on this earth. But no, they'd rather deal with the unborn, and that's just not the gospel way. You know that you don't. If you really cared about these fetuses, that if you really cared about human life, that when a child is born, that's when you really would step up and you would support mothers who needed support. You know, there are many women who get abortions because they just can't afford to support a child. Well, if you care so much, stop spending so much money on lobbying and support, you know, women so they can raise these children. A lot of women get abortions and don't want to, but they don't care about it. What they care about, I mean, what their main thing is being obsessed with an issue that Jesus and the Bible never talks about. They act that's their number one issue, and the Bible never talks about it. Now, it has nothing to do with whether abortion is right or wrong. Abortion is a tough thing. I mean, it can do real damage to a woman's body. There are women I know who really were, been traumatized physically and emotionally, and others have other reasons. But we're not getting into that. We're talking about what the Bible says. And you can say, I'm really against abortion. You can't say it's a biblical sin. You can't say that God said this, God said that. You can't say that it's I'm standing on Christian ground. That's not it, because nowhere in the Bible from Genesis to Revelation does it say anything directly about it. And the only places you find it, Exodus chapter 21, verses 22, 23, and you look it up, you see that a fetus that is killed, if a woman is struck, if the woman's hurt, the penalty is an eye for an eye. If the fetus is killed, it's a financial fine that has to be paid. It shows that the living, breathing person who's already born is valued more highly than a fetus in the biblical narrative. That's it.
Okay, so thank you so much, Margaret, for your questions. We are going to transition to Reverend Solomon Cochran. He has some questions for you. And as we prepare to transition, there is one question on that subject. Is abortion murder?
Not according to the Bible, it's not murder. And in Christians Against Christianity, in my chapter on abortion, as you know, I go back to the very beginning, and I look at what the church fathers said, not just what the scriptures say, and there's never been any consensus at all. It's not, no consensus is biblically based because it's not in the Bible, but there's never been a theological consensus about when life begins. Some people said it begins with the first zygote, when it's fertilized. Well, that's a workable opinion, I guess, but ain't nothing but an opinion biblically. Others say that it's when a woman can first feel a fetus kicking, and that's when life begins. But there is no consensus about abortion being murder, not a biblical consensus, nor a Christian consensus at all. There never has been one at all. So is it murder? Not according to Christianity, it's not. Yeah, brother, if you would take it off of...
I'm off the mic. All right. My name is, as she introduced, I am a pastor for the AME Zion Church here in North Carolina, also a PhD candidate, doctoral student for the University of Memphis. Just a quick background. I have many questions, but we don't have many times. So I'm going to go to a few, hopefully, that we can etch out. One, which is my favorite part of the book, and I just love all of your work, but the epilogue for me does the whole book. And so I'm listening to this, and I'm driving, and it talks about the spirit of the antichrist, and I'm like, wait, is he calling them the antichrist? And so because I think there's also this understanding, or this, people have been taught to look for this big, ugly monster to come, like this Left Behind type of scenario and situation. And it seems like you're pointing us, and correct me if I'm wrong, in the direction that the white evangelicals, Christians, are harboring this anti-Christ-like narrative and theme. If you can, for us, can you unpack that and really take us through that space?
Yeah, well, that's a very good question, brother. I take my cue from First John, which he talks about. He talks about those who are deceivers, and who essentially are misportraying the nature of Jesus Christ. and he calls them antichrists in plural, meaning that what they are teaching is the opposite, or is against, as opposed to what Jesus taught, what the gospel teaches, right? And that's what I'm saying about right-wing evangelicalism. It's and John says that they are, what causes them is a spirit of antichrist, or a spirit of anti-Christianity, one might say. And what I'm saying is that right-wing evangelicals have a similar spirit of antichrist, in that what they have been doing and saying and purveying and misleading these people, causing so much pain and even death, that it is the antithesis of what Jesus taught. And what makes it anti-Christian is that they're teaching it in the name of Christ. And that's blasphemy. Let's face it, they're right-wing evangelicals have a blasphemous theology. And it's not life-giving, it's death-dealing. And so that's what I meant by that. And, as you know, there's no antichrist in the book of Revelation. The beast is not the antichrist. The beast is the beast, but a lot of people mix them up. So I make it clear in the book that that's not what I'm talking about.
Right. Perfect. Let's see. And hopefully you can even dig deeper for us with this, or just give us some background. What I enjoy about all of your books is that I tell people is that it rests well in the hall of academia. I can take it there, but I also can take it to the streets and the corners of Bed-Stuy or Brownsville, and those people can pick it up and grab it as well. Your books, your writing, your lens and your voice can speak to a plethora of individuals that makes it palatable and digestible for all persons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Would you say, is that intentional? Is that the goal? Or is that just something that just happens to be the case?
Well, brothers, it's a good question. It is intentional because, I had left the church at an early age and got involved in the Black nationalist movement. I grew up in that Black nationalist movement. When I came back to the church, eventually, I came back as my site of service and struggle. And if you want to serve people and, be in service to the struggle of our people, then, we have to reach our people. So I consciously do not write using a lot of theory. I try to explain if something might seem a little complex. I try to explain terms if necessary, but I try to avoid using stuff that, that to the average person in the pew that might turn them off or they might not understand. So it's strategic, and the reason I want to make sure that it's a strategic choice is because I think it's a choice that more of my colleagues need to make. We have to decide, who are we writing for?
Yes.
Now, you're in the PhD program, so you're going to have to write a book for other academics. Okay, you're going to have to do that, but you don't have to do that for the rest of your life, right?
Right.
So if our focus is on our folk, then we need to keep them in mind while we're writing, when we're free, to write what we want to write.
All right. My next question is going to chapter 5, where it's titled, I have other sheep not in this fold. And there seems to be, you don't directly say it, but there always seems to be, particularly in America, particularly white evangelicals, that there's a monopoly on Jesus. There's a monopoly on God.
Mm.
So can you speak to us more into that? That's the essence of what I pulled from that chapter. But can you dig a little deeper in that for us?
Yeah. You know, Christians, too often Christians act like we are the only ones who can have a real relationship with God. And others might have a relationship, but it's not the real relationship with God if you don't consciously declare Jesus Christ is your Lord and Savior. But you know, and what right-wing evangelicals have done, and those who support them, which includes some Black people, is they apply that to you know, politically too. I mean, they use it nationalistically, and so you know, Mexicans are demonized because of that. They're not sheep of our fold. Muslims, and what I show is that Jesus never got involved in that kind of exclusionary stuff. He just never did. And I mean, there are so many examples of those that he cleaved to. I mean, he healed a Roman centurion's son, right? I mean, who was more hated than the Romans? And then with Muslims, you know, the way they demonize Muslims, you know, Muslims revere Jesus.
Right.
The Quran talks about Jesus 71 times. They don't worship Jesus, but they revere him as a prophet. They even believe in the Immaculate Conception. And so when Jesus said, "They're sheep, they're not of my fold, of this fold," he's saying that there are others who essentially, I think, in the way Martin Luther King, I quoted Martin Luther King in this chapter in Christians Against Christianity, and essentially what he's saying that he says that Jesus is saying that there are other folk who, you know, who subscribe to my teachings or live consistently with my teachings, though who aren't part of, you know, part of this thing, part of my group, or maybe not even Judaism. And, you know, and we know there are people like that. Mahatma Gandhi was like that, you know, and I gotta tell you, some of the most spiritual people and self-sacrificial people I know are not Christians, because they haven't come out and said they are, but they live more Christ-like than most Christians I know. I know an atheist. He was my doctoral dissertation advisor in graduate school at Princeton University. I could not believe this man was an atheist because he was the most loving man. He did everything he could to help people. And Jesus didn't tell us what we had to believe. He told us how we had to live. And he didn't say you had to say these words or you ain't in the game. He never said anything like that. So, you know, if we keep that in mind, we would treat people differently as a nation. You know, we would respect people who are not of our national fold. That's what I talk about in Christians Against Christianity.
Okay, so someone asked a question and wanted us to expound on that particular question and asked, do you feel that the Black church act as if it has a monopoly on God?
Yeah, there's some Black Christians who do that. They're Christians, I guess, black and white Christians, you know. But one thing that the Black church does a lot less now, I think, than it did, certainly a lot less than it did 10 years ago, is the way it treats gay people. You know, like we can say who's in the household of God and who isn't in the household of God. When Jesus gave his only real mode of judgment in Matthew 25:31-46, he said, you know, those who are going to go into eternal life are those who feed the hungry, those who shelter the and clothe the naked and shelter the homeless, you know, those who take care of the least of these. They're going to eternal life. He didn't say anything about who you sleep with and this, that, and the other, and who you love. He said, just make sure you do love, right? We can't, but a lot of Christians in our churches, you know, they forget that if somebody is the same gender loving person, you know, they want to treat them like they are, you know, a child of some other lesser God. You know, that's not consistent with the gospel. I understand that old folks, it's hard for them sometimes, you know, to understand different lifestyles. I don't even call it lifestyle, different way people relate to one another. But still, we don't have a right to look down on anyone, even because we don't understand their relations. And so that's what I was trying to convey in that chapter, Christians Against Christianity.
Thank you for that. All right, we have about 5 minutes left. And so let's end with hopefully wrapping this up. And one, thank you for sharing and for taking the time with us, but also if you want to take this time to share what's next, what's going on right now for Dr. Hendricks, and where we can find more of your materials, your work, other speaking engagements or what have you, so we can stay connected to you. I will personally say, for those of you that have hit, this book is amazing, but what really hooked me with Dr. Hendricks is how he explains the real understanding of prayer when the disciples asked for prayer. So definitely go check that out. But Dr. Hendricks, if you could share with us what's, you know, where we can get your other information of your other publications and any work that you're working on now.
Okay. Well, you know, so much of that is available on my new website, which we really just launched, the new one, which is Obery Hendricks PhD.com, Obery, Obery Hendricks PhD.com. It's all one word. And that has some of what's upcoming and some other information on it. And you know what I'm doing now is, you know, I'm working on, my first book was a biblical novel on the woman at the well called Living Water, and I still hear about it from women today. The book was published 20 years ago, and you know, a lot of women still use in Bible studies and all that. I'm working on a sequel, actually, sort of, but it's based on Mark 5, the Gerasene demoniac, the demon-filled young man. And the central question I answer in this novel is, what drove the brother crazy? And you know, and in looking at the trajectory of his life, you know, I deal with a lot of issues. You know, it's set in that biblical period, right? But a lot of issues, interpersonal issues of, you know, family issues, issues of oppression. It's much more interesting than I'm explaining today. But I will say, the main character is a brother who's a son of an evil priest who doesn't want to do nothing but be high priest, and he hates it because his son. He taught his son to teach to play a liturgical horn, but his son fell in with some boys who are tantamount to jazz, to today's jazz. So they use the instruments to play another kind of music, you know, and they don't wear their prayer caps, right? They wear their prayer caps acey-deucey, you know, like you know brothers do, man. And their robes, they're not the bottom of the robes is not flat. It's like it's slanted. They got to, you know what I mean? So it's cool. It's sort of a John Coltrane type character, you know, and I'm having fun with it. And I'm also working on a book called Political Economy and the Kingdom of God, you know, looking at capitalism and socialism and what might be, and what, trying to envision a mode of political economy that could be consistent with the basic values of the kingdom of God.
Well, thank you, and thank you so much for taking the time just to be with us this evening and to share from your heart and to share from your work. I've been getting inboxes and messages just about how deep you are and how great your mind is. And so we want you to know how much we appreciate you and your scholarship, that your work does not go unnoticed, that you have a whole legion of people. Yes, you all make sure you get the book. I've been putting it in the chat, in the discussion, to make sure that we support your work, whether it's the audiobook, the Kindle, or the hard copy, or the paperback, that we support you, because support is more than just saying you're doing a good job, but making sure that we're sharing the work. So we want you to know that we appreciate you and we thank you for being a voice for us.
Well, thank you. And I've enjoyed this very much. I really have. You're very, very kind, and all the best to you in your work. You're doing important work. And any way I can be of support in the future, and I don't have to be the subject, but anyway I can be of support as a panelist or anything, or anyway, let me know. I mean that sincerely.
Wonderful. Well, don't say that to me, because I will definitely take you up on that offer.
Hey,
you do not have to worry. But thank you all. Have a wonderful night. And this is not the last that you will see of Dr. Hendricks in our group, because I will definitely be inviting him back. So y'all have a great night, and we will see you for the next event.
Thank you. God bless. Take care, everyone. Bye.